now we move on to the next panel discussion here on stage with the topic of smart health into digital transformation. And for that, I would like to call back in here on stage His Excellency Ghassan Hasbani, Deputy Prime Minister from the Ministry of Public Health in Lebanon, joined by the Chief Technology Officer of TELUS, Dr. Ibrahim Jadon, Partner at Nexen, Mr. Hani Obaid. Senior Director, Employee Happiness, EITC, Dr. Mansour Habib. And Chief Executive Officer of Centrigent, Mr. Jay Sraj. And to moderate your panel discussion for this topic, please also welcome Managing Partner, Governance Dynamics, Mr. Fadi Sidani.
Thank you very much for the very exciting presentation, Your Excellency. And I wanted to basically discuss, the KPIs that, as we evolve into the new world of smart cities and, smart health and smart, and as far as we focus on the smart health in particular, what are the critical KPIs that we should be looking at this point?
Sure. I mean, when we're looking at the impact of technology on the healthcare, we're looking at three main areas. The first one is going to be about healthcare improvement for the patient. So that is improving mortality rates of certain diseases, improving the success rates of procedures. So it's really about the improvement of the healthcare of the client or the patient. The second area is going to be about the reduction of cost. I mean, today healthcare is quite a heavy burden on many governments, on many institutions. So the reduction of cost is going to be quite a critical component in the introduction of technology. And the third one is going to be about creation of value for the businesses. So at the end, there is profit to be made by healthcare providers, by the ecosystem around the healthcare providers. So while the government provides the support for the success of the sector, it's important for the value creation that technology gives by the introduction of new products and services and new technologies.
Okay. So, yeah,
I'd like to add to that as well. I mean, when we're looking at various deployments in digital health and smart services, one of the key KPIs that keeps coming up for us is enhancing the patient experience through more streamlined services, easier access to healthcare, and these are some of the things that all lead to a better and more improved quality of life. So if you look at quality of life, ease of access, easier access of services, those are some of the things that keep coming up when we're looking at the digital health solutions.
Okay.
And, if we take it further, I'm sorry.
Mansour would like to comment. Yeah, Mansour.
It's okay, go ahead.
Please.
Just to take that further a step, outcomes are pretty much the most important indicator to drive backwards from. Right. So healthcare outcome is an evolving measure now today in the new complex systems that we're seeing, whether it's kind of digital or process-driven or technology-assisted, or even in the pharmaceutical industries of healthcare. Outcome has become a key measure for payments. So you basically spend based on outcome, encouraging all the rest to fit within the delivery of the results at the end. So that's how the industry is evolving and where the industry is heading in general. So the kind of higher, most important KPI is becoming healthcare outcome.
Thank you very much. I would like to add a few more things. First of all, thank you for having me today here. And I'm privileged to be a consultant physician in family medicine and occupational health. And coming back from a health background, working in the telecom operator has given me a unique opportunity to marry the two worlds together and to see the missing gap where when I used to be in the healthcare industry for the last 8 years up to 2009, we were in a very much closed box thinking as physicians, where we are very much driven with certain outcomes. But we're moving to the corporate world and having this exponential growth in technology and trying to add it to the healthcare value, as mentioned by the Deputy Minister in his talk, has focused on two main things which I would like to emphasize a lot as a physician. Number one, the medical errors. Until today, we have an equal to 2 A380 airline number of people of death every year across the globe. If we have one airline crashes tomorrow, everybody will gonna panic. But we don't realize that in the medical error because it goes on, and people with the ego of the physicians, they don't like to accept failure. So I believe the first KPI is the medical error, and here I would say the technology will be our black box. This is the black box for the healthcare industry. The second thing is the patient satisfaction, engagement, happiness. Let's be realistic. With the addition of technology as a physician, I spend most of my time adding the information and entering the details of the patient in the IT system, rather than focusing, having that chat with the patient, looking him eye to eye, listening to him actively so that he feels he's been taken care of, rather than just being in a technology-driven environment. So a strong role of technology to be an enabler, hence the second KPI will be the patient satisfaction, or obviously from an experience perspective.
So we're talking here about really what we call, quote unquote, the customer's experience. Just making sure that it is it's a pleasant one, it's an effective one, and is it a cost-efficient one?
Well,
Ibrahim, what do you think?
like my issue is, and I have to say, when Minister Hasbani was talking about what could happen, I was very excited as an engineer and where technology is taking us. Because I think with AI and robotics, a lot of our jobs will be defined, and I don't think that's being addressed. But to go what Dr. Mansour is saying, the better health outcome is very critical, but that's not the driving force. So we need to look at what is the digital strategy. And if I look at healthcare, you can't take it out from where Smart City or what the government's doing as a citizen. So when you talk about the KPIs overall, we need to look at how are we captured. And then as we get digitized, how are we saving money or not saving money? But to be honest, at least for Canada, like as I was telling Hassan, we spend $3 billion in R&D. And most of it is predicated on what AI is doing and better health outcome. But the business case for every health authority is cost savings. I have to be completely honest. And one of the biggest transformative steps that we're doing is, I'm so excited, but he's not a typical, if you look at Minister Hasbani, he's not a typical healthcare guy. The notion of customer doesn't exist. So if you look at a hospital, they optimize around the doctor's time, which is fantastic, no disrespect to physicians. But if they look at the amount of time the 18 people around the doctor goes, they'll realize they should optimize around the patient. And we're not getting there. So if you look at the big transformation, when we talk about smart cities and what we're doing, is we need to anchor it around not the most valuable resource, but what is waste in the ecosystem, which is, as we talked about, the redundancy and whatnot, and I think we're not there yet.
Yeah. Well, this morning, Mr. Osman talked about the fact to start with the person and it's moving towards the person again. And I think this is very important to keep in focus. But as we speak about smart cities, I have a big issue with that. Because what about those little villages? Your Excellency, in Lebanon, if you talk about Lebanon, we have gazillion little villages everywhere, right? And these villages are not going to have any fiber optics soon. And these villages, perhaps the residents of those villages are the people who are most in need of smart healthcare. So how do we propose to deliver this value to them? These are the people who are likely not to be able to afford it and need it the most.
Interestingly, a lot of developments that are happening in smart care and cities can be applied to rural areas and underdeveloped areas. I'll give you a concrete example of what we've implemented in Lebanon, for example. We put in our 2025 strategy remote medicine as a key pillar in there. It started off by deploying a technology that was invented for home care. We actually deployed it in primary healthcare centers dotted around the country in rural areas. So instead of going all the way to home care, where it is the case in more evolved and developed markets, we actually put it in almost like a community health center, whereby people in the local community would come in, assisted by a nurse or a local physician. they can actually perform several basic tests on this machine, which is a tiny machine the size of an iPad, and be consulted remotely by a physician sitting in a university center, or even a Lebanese physician abroad within the big Lebanese diaspora who always like to help their hometowns and rural areas. On top of that, we've actually put in the plan, but it hasn't been implemented yet because it's second phase, all the activities around remote medicine and healthcare, which are basically the remote sensors for the basic blood sugar levels, heart diseases and heart problems, so that people who cannot frequently visit doctors and major medical centers can also be monitored remotely and accessed whenever their readings start to go off charts. So that is reducing costs significantly. The early numbers are showing us that 40% of primary healthcare visits have actually happened in those centers where we deployed the remote medicine systems. 40% of visits happened on that system already in the trial phase. So there's great potential for using technology to serve a otherwise lower access areas and citizens in developing regions.
May I add to what Minister Hasbani is saying? In Canada, remote is a different terminology. It's a 5-hour flight. Like you can fly north and you're still in Canada.
Well, from Accra to Beirut, it's a 5-hour drive with traffic.
But to add to what it is, the biggest challenge we had is dispensing medicine.
Yes.
So we created, like you would go to a Coke machine, we created special medicines, which doesn't cover it. And now we're trialing with Amazon drone technology, so you can send it to remote areas. So it's very interesting the way you've captured it. The diagnosis is not a big issue for us. We've got remote medicine. But now it's the remote dispensation of medicine. Like how do you make sure to get basically the Tylenol 3s and the drugs and the anti-inflammatories. So we tried the kiosks, and now we're doing the drone delivery. So it's not just Amazon and buying shirts and toys. It's very critical for the medicine delivery.
Mansour, you want to comment?
In that regard, sometimes physicians come to me as my colleagues being skeptical and giving me the notion that are our jobs at risk? Shall we look for another thing to be done? And then I comfort them and I tell them, no, you have to think differently. The role of technology and smart city is an enabler to allow us to practice in a much better fashion. Having said about the smart solution, which has been done in Lebanon or in Canada, we've started this back since 2010, 2011 as well at DO, and we piloted a lot of solutions for remote healthcare, for chronic cases, for wearables, for prevention and well-being, because we have a strong platform of well-being in the organization. And luckily, having the clinic within our company, we have collaborated with the government and with many other agencies to try to pilot the way to move forward when it comes to the uptake of such technology-driven satellite clinics or future remote stations. Even in GITEX, something was showcased, which hopefully very soon going to go live across the country. But here, I think the one thing which, if I see it from my perspective as a physician, which will allow the digital and technology world to leverage upon more, is the trust of the patient. At the end of the day, suddenly you are depriving the patient from that face-to-face encounter. At an initial stage, we're not talking about trivial cases, just in a primary care settings. The most important thing here is the trust. Once they trust you, I am sure remote healthcare will be such a huge success, because it will allow you to have that personal approach. While you are sitting at your home, you feel unwell, you can contact your family doctor and speak to him. Because now what we do when we feel unwell these days, the first thing we do before going to the doctor, the current process, I'll call my friend or my spouse or someone close by and ask him what to do.
Word of mouth.
Here, I will have the leverage to open my iPad, call my doctor instantly, and tell him this is what's happening. I'll get that comfort at least, so that if it's in the middle of the night, I don't need to rush to the hospital.
Yeah, this is a very personal business. You develop this trust over a period of time, and as a person or a family, it's like a dentist or an eye doctor or whatever, and making the shift to telemedicine is a
I think, sorry, I don't want to knock the medical profession down, but the biggest impediment has been the medical profession. with remote medicine on the consultations. I think if you talk to actual citizens, they would love the fact that they can have a video chat with somebody who is a bit educated that tells them you don't have to come to the hospital.
That's the, sorry to cut you.
Because Mansoor, no, interrupt me. It's
Go ahead,
okay, but let
tell
me
me.
just finish the thought. Because when somebody's sick, the last thing they want to do is to bundle up. It's minus 40 where I live. Get dressed.
Here it's plus 40.
It's plus 40. Same shit, different temperature. Get warmed up or get cool the car. So you can bundle your little kid or your spouse or partner to drive and then wait. Like it would be godsend. If we think of patient-centric or customer-centric, we would love at least to get triaged remotely. In Canada, the issue we have is the medical association and the way they dispense, because we're in a social medical system.
Yeah.
Remote medicine is X amount of dollars. Face-to-face is 2X. So the physician would always love you to drive at minus 40, spend 20 minutes waiting. And by the way, if you've been to Canada, you have to take your friggin' boots off because you dirty everything. You're walking in your socks, wait for an hour and a half so they can charge you 2X. So I would rather they take 2X for remote and 1X for live.
Absolutely, because maybe the different issue here in the country, people
Is air
do
conditioning.
medical shopping like anything. Oh my God. Everyone, ask them in the weekend, where did you go? He will tell you, I went to the mall, to there, and to the clinic. It's the culture here is, there is this anxiety factor. So I believe the telemedicine, absolutely, it will help to shift the people to a more trust relationship. And here comes that once it's been implemented, it has to come up with positive results, and people need to talk about it from a trust relationship. And the physician, I believe, is the biggest obstacle, might not be the digital industry, it might be ourselves. We are very egoistic. We will feel we are threatened by this telemedicine, although on the contrary, I think would be the most amazing things happening.
I'm agreeing with you then.
So the question so again, we're focusing on the customer experience and the awareness. A question is to Jay, with this concept, is the classical way of doing business, the health business, going to change?
So let's take a look at it from a couple of comments as well to add here, which is tied to your question. So the first one, the adoption of the healthcare industry of all these technologies is really what's at stake here. When we're talking about remote healthcare or telemedicine, that's the easiest part to adopt. We're working with NMC Healthcare, which is the largest service provider here, and they wanted to provide premium services in rural areas. So they set up these kind of minivans with video communication, 360 AR-based AR/VR, where the doctor actually can see and be in that van and at the same time communicate with the patient and look at the screens and look at the different areas of that mobile clinic.
Is this in the case of emergency, or this is just
No, this is
normal
where they go to rural areas where they don't have access to healthcare, and then they tie back to the NMC health network.
So would the medical team actually go
No,
physically
they
to the
wouldn't.
house, or the patient comes to the van?
No, the patient goes to the van. So it's just like the Dubai police announcing the mobile police stations, where they go to you. This is the same concept, where the mobile, let's call it healthcare unit, goes to the patient. They go into the van, and they actually communicate with the doctor in any of the NMC network. So that exists today, and that is the easiest part to adopt. The problem is the next gap is the adoption of, when we talk about AI and artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, all of these, they become much harder to adopt. So what we're seeing now is a gap between the technology pace and the pace of how the industry moves in terms of
Jace, sorry, I'm going to not interrupt you, but can you add convenience for the patient as you talk about it? I think if you add that as a dimension, I'm with you. The adoption will go faster.
Exactly. So it's both, actually, access, the ability to access, and the convenience.
The challenge there is also one of regulations. I think that's critical because in any industry, particularly in the healthcare industry, there are certain liabilities on physicians. We have to face that also. We cannot just bypass it. Whether it's remote medicine or robotic-assisted operations or AI-assisted or remote or whatever. who holds the ultimate responsibility for a medical error, for example. And when I said outcome-based as a key KPI or a main KPI, the outcome is about the quality of the treatment in general and the entire experience that the patient has gone through and whether he's been or she's been cured perfectly or not, or there was a medical error, etc. Regulations have to follow technology very quickly. We're still struggling with the liability of a physician if they diagnose remotely, for example, or misdiagnose remotely.
Right.
There's the compensation of physicians. There's also the volume of work. A surgeon who performs today 2 operations a day or 3 could actually end up performing 15 with robotic and AI-assisted technology.
Right.
But can he actually sustain the responsibility and the increased potential of medical error with the increased volume on that front? All of these are questions that we still need to address that are not part of any regulations. They could fall through the cracks, and we need to quickly get regulations to keep up with technology and catch up with technological differences, which will then help and enable faster deployment. Because regulations are also linked to compensation. A physician that gets paid X on 3 operations today would have to get paid X divided by 2 or 3 on 15 operations tomorrow. It cannot be the same cost, of course, because we're increasing efficiency. Therefore, he will make, or he or she will make more money, but the volume will increase as well, while the cost to patients will decrease, and more patients can actually be treated. So we just need to put the legal system and the compensation systems to encourage physicians and institutions alike to take on these technologies and start deploying without losing neither on the legal side, nor on the human side, nor on the commercial side.
But you know,
And
the
you-
issue here is that technology is evolving at a rate of
Much
18,
faster.
18 months to 24 months. That's the latest where you get to the next generation. Having the legal framework followed by even the industry itself, so not just the regulatory part, the industry itself is much slower in making the decisions.
Yeah.
So by the time you actually talk to them about these specific technologies that are available to go into the digital transformation and it goes through the whole approval process, you're going to end up with a new generation of technologies coming in.
Yeah, but this is why you're going to have to rely on risk takers and decision makers to make those decisions. In our case, we took that decision without regulations being in place. And we're still in discussion with the physicians, the Order of Physicians, for example, in Lebanon, to understand how they can actually co-live with remote medicine and remote
And
diagnosis.
it's because you came from telecom.
Yes. So you do need that kind of courage in deploying, launching, and learning. And then, like any
You're
laws
refined.
and regulations, they also tend to emerge out of experience rather than predetermined before you deploy, which is always the case. Something happens, you learn from it, you change the regulations to fit that situation. And that's the only way to do it.
Can I ask a question, follow-up? Has there been a dramatic situation, like once you started, and I'm with you because you think like an engineer, so let's pilot it, let's refine it, let's have a feedback loop. But have we lost 380 in the process yet? Yani have we had a
it's not that
catastrophic?
catastrophic, no, because
And
remote
you stick to
diagnosis
basic
is
stuff.
Not something
Okay.
big. Also, this is to reduce the risks. We actually have a trained medical professional on site in the primary healthcare.
So you've-
to
you've
oversee
cushioned the-
link.
okay.
You cushion the impact.
good.
The biggest dramatic impact is from physicians and hospitals asking how much do we get paid for this.
But I have a question.
It's the
with
same in
regards
Canada
to-
then.
I have a question with regards to the potential liability of the telecom operators. Before the patient could go to a doctor, 101, the doctor diagnose or misdiagnose, it's clear. Now you have middle entities, middle people, just like the telecom operator, and maybe the people who sell the equipment itself, which is transmitting the information. And the question is to Hani, does this pose any kind of exposure to the telecom operators, and what could healthcare providers do and operators do to counter that?
Well, let me start with, I think what I'm hearing is we're at an inflection point here, where we're trying to put healthcare disruption in terms of our solutions that we have. We're trying to reshape our regulations. We're trying to educate our labor force in terms of the impacts of technology and the efficiencies that come with it. And we're like moving back and forth between, shall we deep dive into further solutions, joining hands with various telco operators and vendors in terms of developing patient-centric digital services, or do we focus on the bricks and mortars? Because citizens are complaining, we don't want to line up days, hours, even months in Canada. Having lived in Toronto for 15 years, you got to book your appointment, a couple months in advance to see your doctor, and you're lucky if you see him. But put that aside, and all due respect to Canadian healthcare, we do pay taxes for it, so it's okay for now. The key thing here is, what are we going to do to address this issue? Do we build more hospitals? OECD average is 4.4 hospital beds per 1,000 inhabitants, according to OECD. Here in MENA, we're about 1.9 per 1,000 inhabitants. Just look at that stats. We don't even have the brick and mortar solution intact today. So is technology, is digital services the way to move and invest our resources into, which is more sustainable, more effective, and addresses outcome-based KPIs, addresses quality of life KPIs, addresses easier access to urban dwellers? I mean, this is where I think the future lies with us.
Just to, on that note, in Lebanon, it's 3.5 beds per 1,000. So we have excess beds, yet we still have sometimes issues in coverage. So technology is still highly, highly useful.
Healthcare specifically, I'm going to talk
So you talk about liability. You talked in a second what the telecom operator's liability is.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd love to hear from Dr. Mansour. What do you think it'll be here? Because in Canada, we decouple consumer health from medical health. So it's very clear for us that we sell through the health authority and the ministry for what we call the EMR type stuff, which is serious. And then for patient health, it is consumer, it has AI, it's proactive, but it doesn't have prescriptions unless it marries with the other stuff. So I'd love to see what the vision for the Gulf is to get around liability, because the last thing we need, we have enough lawsuits from other areas, from patent infringement. The last thing we need is to get that from when somebody gets the wrong diagnosis.
No, I think I'm aligned in that regard. When it comes to therapeutic aspect of the healthcare, then that is highly regulated. Our health regulation department, whether it's in the city of Dubai or in the Ministry of Health, are very much aware, because that's a nation agenda. The whole country is moving towards digitalization, towards embracing our lifestyle in our hand, in our pocket, which is the mobile or the smartphone. Hence, the awareness is there, the uptake is there, and the willingness to incorporate new regulations that will allow to govern that is very much in place, especially when it comes to prescription aspect, which is regulated through an online system, which is called the e-claim at the back end. But when it comes to prevention and well-being and enhancing your lifestyle, then here there is a room of flexibility. Just 2 months ago, we have completed the Dubai 30 by 30 fitness challenge, which is every day you do 30 minutes of physical activity, and there is a specific app which has been developed by the Dubai Tourism and the Dubai Sport Council, where you enter your data, you enter your parameters, your weight, some of your sugar, cholesterol, and stuff, and then you look at the outcome once you do, and you burn certain calories by the end of the month. Hence, they want to push the society to embrace the well-being from that perspective. Having said, it does not reach to the level of prescribing anything, because that is, I think, where the line where we need to be really careful about when moving into that.
Speaking of regulations, so how are you dealing with the data privacy for patients? Is this properly regulated?
And that's the beauty of the telecom. Being ourselves as an operator and our data server are within the country, the privacy of the data is there. It's been taken care fully because it is embedded inside the country, regulated by the Telecom Regulatory Authority, by the Health Authority. There is a huge security governance structure around the data which is being kept within and inside the country, and this is being taken personally by the top leaders and the management and the Prime Minister himself, that this is a message that we want to ensure that we are in a safe and a reliable environment when it comes to such a personal data as critical as your health parameters.
Your Excellency, with regards to the same issue, privacy of, of the patients, how is that protected in Lebanon? Do we have enough regulations or proper regulations? And what about enforcement of those regulations?
Look, privacy is there in the medical practice law. It's quite well understood. As you move digital, and when you have digital records of patients, etc., what we're setting now in the law is to actually have that data reside on the Ministry of Health secure servers, and with access rights to specific medical professionals. Because where do you actually stop? Would you allow full access, for example, for insurance companies before an individual takes up insurance or not? All those are still open questions, to be honest. But as far as privacy is concerned, with the medical biometric card and with the data residing on a secure cloud managed and under the operation of the Ministry of Public Health, we ensure the protection of patient privacy with certain specific access rights to different medical professions. Today, privacy is still held by the Code of Ethics of Physicians. It's still a kind of a human physical privacy with files dotted all over the place. Once the files are in one place, this is where privacy becomes more of a concern, and we're dealing with that based on having one cloud, one place to have it with access rights under the permission of a biological key as well as biometric key, sorry, as well as the patient card with the patient's presence and consent.
I got to talk about security here. So I think privacy is guaranteed by keeping it on site. I think the security becomes an issue because every doctor could be a bad actor because they have access to the data. But more importantly, if we want AI to work, it's the amount of data that they have access to make AI more relevant. So isolating the UAE or the Dubai data or the Lebanese data, it does not actually help them participate in the ecosystem to get better outcomes for the citizens of Lebanon and the UAE.
No, but for us, the data is published without privacy information.
Oh, فهمت.
So,
okay. It's anonymized.
Anonymized, and for example, the cancer registries, the diabetes, etc. All trends
Because
are
you wanted to
published.
participate in the
Yes.
ecosystem.
They're all published, and this is a prerequisite for us, including the pharmaceutical history file of patients in pharmacies that is being introduced
So
now.
it's fully tokenized. You don't
We've
care.
actually signed an MOU with them to actually publish the data. So drug companies can see the trends and data without seeing the personal
Exactly.
Excellent.
Same.
Okay.
So we have,
It could be monetized.
This is why we publish it, so it doesn't get monetized.
as the world becomes one big village, right? And laws becomes, across borders. How do we ensure the proper compliance with, local and international regulations? We heard about the GDPR, that was issued in Europe with regards to security of information for European citizens and corporates. So I'm sure there are other regulations that are within each country and that's going to be cross-border. So what should the health operators do? What should be the telecom operators do to ensure proper compliance with these regulations?
Okay, and we have, if I may start, we have what we call a Chief Data Trust Privacy Officer. So it's not just a pictorial. She's a lady in our case. She's got a law degree. And as Ghassan said, we're discovering things as we go along, to be completely honest. That team went from 18 people to 28, and we're probably going to double because we're trying to do what we call data trust privacy by design. Just like it was cyber 5 years ago in security, it's the same for trust now. And to be honest, every case, I feel sorry. She reports to me, and I sit with her. Every case is new. Every time there's an extra, like oncologists are different than endodontists, the dentistry, so every case is different on the medical profession, but more importantly on the smart city. So I don't want to talk about certain countries. Canada is not one of them. But I can tell you when you should cross the street. We think it's smart, but there's also that big brother aspect. So you go to certain demos. I know you crossed the street. I know when you got in. It's more than Mark Zuckerberg. We as nations have things in place, and we're not talking about terrorism. We're talking about convenience. So I think we give the medical profession a rap because of the liability, but there's so many other areas behind. So you go to a country when they said your driver's license walked into the parking lot, there's 3 people in the car. Where's privacy there?
So, it's interesting. Would you like to comment, Jay, on the same matter?
I mean, at the end, when it comes to the ensuring of the compliance, it's about the work that's going to happen between the different regulatory bodies, just like with the GDR that's happening today, getting enforced in other places. But it's really about going back to Dr. Ibrahim's point of opening up the data to get as much as layers of decision possible for the better treatment of the patient.
I think there's no magic pill for really how to best make this work across borders. But what I see is further collaboration, cooperation between countries or nations, cities, districts, as long as they all agree on the outcome, which is better quality of life, easier access to patients. I think we can get there. It's not going to be a smooth journey, but I think keeping that perspective in mind and listening to the citizens of what they need, when they need it, is key for achieving our target.
In our healthcare system, it's quite open to various medical protocols from the US, from Europe, particularly. So we have physicians that follow various protocols, and the laws and regulations in country have to encompass the variety of medical protocols that are evolving, as well as technology is, together with technology, whether it's biotechnology or technical technology. The one way of dealing with this is, for us in Lebanon, for example, if remote medicine is happening, the physician that is actually involved has to be licensed in Lebanon as if he's sitting in Lebanon. Otherwise, a US licensed physician, for example, cannot diagnose, can perform second-line consultation to another physician in Lebanon, yes, remotely. But to actually consult a patient directly, remotely, this cannot be covered by Lebanese law and is highly regulated. So if it's a physician regulated in Lebanon, but residing outside Lebanon for a reason, they can do it. So that, we bypass that system. The other issue, we've just installed the first remote robotic operations arm in Lebanon, in one of the hospitals, whereby a physician or a surgeon in the US can operate that arm, assisted by physicians and surgeons in Lebanon, to perform an operation. 2 issues with that we're tackling. First, communication and latency. This is a very important thing for the accuracy of the operation. So that we've limited that to operations with predetermined robotic actions rather than manually operated robotic actions. Secondly, it's the physicians who are in the operating theater that have the full responsibility to take the final action, assisted and guided by the surgeon outside the country who's not licensed to operate in Lebanon. So that's why we still have the physical world. A big issue in the US now in medical errors, a lot of the robotic sales agents or the companies that sell robotic arms for operations encourage physicians to have only 3 out of 5 operations supervised by a human, claiming that they can take the risk of having 2 operations unsupervised completely by a robot. In our case, we never take that risk. A human supervision has to always be there.
Yes.
And the responsibility and liability is on the surgeon overseeing physically that operation in the operating theater.
I'm told that our time is up. Do we have any questions from the audience? We have a question right there, and we have a question back there.
I'm just going to stand up. My back's killing me.
Need to replace these with massage chairs.
Well, no, just something firm. These chairs are great for like 10 minutes. But they look nice. Look at the colors. They match. Gold contour, a bit of beige thing. It's pretty cool.
You you guys hear me?
The mic is not working.
The mic's not working.
Can you guys hear me?
Randy, shout it out. We're a small team.
Okay, so can I speak up? Let me see if we can hear you.
You want me to shout?
We can shout it from here. These work, right?
Here's another mic.
Can you guys hear me? Fantastic. Okay, this question is for Ghassan. When you talked about nanotech, robotics, material science, biotech, and 3D printing, I didn't see how the amalgamation, along with quantum computers and blockchain, specifically when it comes to cryptography, what it's yet to come in user-centric effort to protect the user. I know you mentioned privacy and perhaps differential privacy, what you have in Lebanon. I'm not sure how you're able to accomplish that cross-border without utilizations of something like blockchain or whatnot to make it more user-centric rather than state-centric.
Look, briefly, just in the end, the concept and perception of privacy is changing significantly as technology infiltrates our lives. What was a private piece of data 10 years ago is today probably something that's not important to be private anymore. However, as a general rule in technology, if it is user permission driven, then everything else works. So once the user is verified as the right person being there, providing access permission with the limitations of access being in the system on the type of person accessing the information and data, then we are within a system of privacy. As with the physical world, you go to a doctor and you hand over your files or your test results, or he can access them from the labs, etc. But it is you that gives that permission to the physician to do that.
That's precisely what I'm talking about. How are you able to give the physician your data if, let's say, you're traveling across the globe and you happen to be in Lebanon?
When your data
is user-centric.
Yeah, the system we're deploying in Lebanon is cloud-based. So basically, it's internet access. It's not a closed system. Very simple, very cheap, very cost-effective. Can be accessed from anywhere in the world, provided you have your ID card with you, which is a biometric ID card, and with a photo. So if the physician can recognize you as that person with your ID, and if they have the form, the thumb fingerprint to verify biometrically, then they verify that this is you. This is why I said the concept is to make sure that the other person can verify your identity. Secondly, you, as the verified identity individual, give permission to access.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It sounds exciting. Frankly, the reputation
But I can't
of...
hear you.
Oh, can you guys hear me now? Frankly, the reputation of health in Lebanon is far superior than anything else that's happening in Lebanon, so I'm hoping that all other industries in Lebanon would follow what you guys are doing. So thank you. I guess that answers the question.
Thank you.
There another question back there?
Yes. Hello? Can you hear me?
It's snowing.
Should work. All right, my question is also for His Excellency. First of all, I would like to take a moment to actually thank you for all the work you've been doing in Lebanon to modernize and revolutionize the healthcare system. We, as a fellow Lebanese, we know how challenging it was during the last 2 years. So we salute you for your efforts.
Thank you.
Now, my question for you today, especially mixing the world of healthcare and telcos and service providers, there's a concept of connected hospitals and connected medical centers where our hospitals in cities, they are aware what is happening around them. So they have data coming in from the police station, from the civil defense stations, and so on. So, for example, there's a big accident, they would prepare automatically trauma rooms and the physicians behind that. This is not happening in Lebanon up to my knowledge, and I've worked for a while in the dispatch center of the Lebanese Red Cross. There's a lot of cases where people, like the paramedics, they would take the patients to a hospital and then they get rejected for capacity reasons or capability reasons.
So we did it the other way around, actually.
Yeah, so instead of extending healthcare, can you tell us a little bit more how we are enhancing the current healthcare system?
Yeah.
Like how can we focus on connected hospitals?
Thank you for the question. Very quickly, instead of getting the hospital to be smart about what's happening around it, we've actually did the other way around because we have a more basic problem to solve, which was the one you mentioned at the end of your intervention, to make sure that the paramedics know which closest hospital has the availability of the speciality in emergency room. So we've divided up the hospitals into regional clusters. Each region has 1 or 2 hospitals who take on board emergency cases every night. So they are known to the paramedic network that these are the main hospitals to go to. Also, we've developed an application both for the Red Cross and for citizens to know the nearest hospital that has an availability with the speciality of the hospital depending on the trauma or the accident or the case, whether it's a heart or an accident or whatever, or a burn, so that they can locate it, locate the availability, and go to the nearest available bed and emergency service to them in the area. And that goes into different clusters: the immediate area, the secondary area, and the third level area. So we avoid situations where the Red Cross picks up a patient, gets into a hospital, and they can't receive them, so they have to go to another hospital because this one is clogged up. They know ahead of time, and those who are identified as on call on that night, they pre-prepare for emergency cases and leave certain availabilities for last-minute emergency cases to be dropped. We've tested that system within Beirut and Mount Lebanon, and now it's running with 40 hospitals on the hope that we can expand this nationwide.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for Your Excellency and for our panelists, and appreciate the time.